Yeah. Anyway, you ready to go?
Yes.
Hello and welcome to another Sunday Superversive live stream. I am your host, Benjamin Wheeler, and today I'm here with Anthony Marquetta,
Yes.
who is going to go over with me why the two of us are not Orthodox. There are three
Yep.
great,
Yep.
excuse me, there are three great houses of Christianity, as we all know. Catholicism takes a pride in place, then Protestantism, and then Orthodoxy, in rough estimates of believers. Um, Certainly, it's an important cultural milestone, a cultural center for the Slavic world and the Eastern European world in general, and even certain places in Africa. However, we have issues with it, and we have deliberate reasons why we are not Orthodox. But first, Anthony, how are you doing today?
Well, as you know, Ben, never once have I ever had a bad day.
The man must have some especially powerful saints looking after him. What icons does he keep under his bed? I name Anthony a crypto Orthodox. How terrible. I hear he's growing a beard.
I actually am. But with that said, no, it's a small beard. You've seen the beard.
I
It's
know.
just a small
But
beard.
you see the
So
evidence, dear audience.
it can't be denied. Yeah. So Ben and I, it's interesting because the perspective here is why is a Catholic not Orthodox and why is a Protestant not Orthodox? So I'm going to do my best to not speak for Ben, who I'm sure has his own right specific reasons, and he even mentioned something that's not on my list. But uh, I start off my notes with something similar to what Ben said. That once you reach, so there is a point where you reach the point of mere Christianity, right?
Mm.
This is Lewis's great theological master text. It's truly remarkable to me that this is a public. By the way, this is a bit of a sidebar here, but that Mere Christianity was like a book that was written for the public. It was not written for academics, but it's seriously I consider it one of the great theological books of the past century, right? Like it's a
Absolutely.
remarkable book because it manages to do I think what many people would have considered undoable. Come up with a basic idea of Christian beliefs that you need to agree on to be called Christian. This was something that was they had people had tried this, and Lewis actually did it in a way that both Protestants and Catholics and Orthodox all agree on, more or less, right? Like mere
Yep.
Christianity was actually used as a textbook in my Catholic high school. Like that's how significant it is. So, anyway, mentioning that, mere Christianity is that point where you realize that, all right, so Christianity is true. Jesus Christ is Lord. The resurrection is real. Now what? Right? Like, now you're at a crossroads with more or less three great Christian traditions. You have, and I define it like this, and you can correct me with Protestantism if you don't think it's a good definition as well, because this is a quick sketch of Protestantism and it's not an argument against it. It's just me stating without argument my reasons, right? So, Protestantism is the position of where you hold to the primary authority of Scripture alone. Scripture is the only God breathed authority. That is where we get our doctrine. That's where we get our. That's how we define our churches, right? Based exclusively on what is explicitly stated in Scripture. That is Protestantism. Uh, then you have Orthodoxy, where you hold to the primary authority of the church as it is organized in councils, and in as well as to bishops who you owe obedience to. That is the Orthodox tradition. And Catholicism, which holds to the authority of the church as it organizes in councils, like Orthodoxy, as well as a living magisterium, meaning a teaching authority that works actively today and has the Pope as a head. So, Ben, first off, do you agree with my rough marker of Protestantism?
Yeah, it's mostly accurate. Most Protestants, even among ourselves, when no Catholics are watching, do tend to devolve. Well, what does the Bible say? What does the Bible say in the Greek? A lot of people like look down on the intellectual traditions of the Protestants, but you'd be surprised how much a special study is going into what the Greek says, what the oldest manuscripts say, and for the few times that there is a difference, for example, in one manuscript it says Israel, in one of Paul in First Second Romans 10, I think, Romans 10, and then another it says them, but inferring Israel, if you get me. So it's like, you don't get the big publicized scholarly debates that you'd see in Catholic or Orthodox circles, but there is an immense, you know, study of Scripture that is the basis for Protestant thought and action.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. Mostly I was thinking of it in terms of like what caused Protestantism mainly to separate. The theological predictions were like sola fide and sola scriptura. And I consider sola fide to be more reconcilable, if not entirely. But
Yes.
like there is more common ground, but sola scriptura to be the one dividing bar where like if you accept it, then you're probably Protestant and you're certainly not Catholic or Orthodox. And if you
Mm.
don't accept it, you're probably not in any of the Protestant traditions,
Yes.
right? Uh, so that's why I mentioned that
I
specifically.
understand. Yeah,
So,
yeah.
uh, I do have a note here that while there are different varieties of Orthodox, in fact, there are quite a few. Eric Ibarra, who I'm going to mention later and is a scholar, uh, he has noted that, like, by the second century or so, I think there were as many Christian sects as there were by the time in Europe in the Middle Ages, like more than you would think. You know,
Yes.
people have no idea about it. Like I didn't know this for a long time. Obviously I do now because I'm telling telling it to all of you. But for a long time, I didn't know this. So it's true though. There is a note here. There are different varieties of Orthodox, and if I rejected both Catholicism and Protestantism, I would need to pick one of them. But the basic authority structure behind all Orthodox churches is roughly the same. It would be more like picking between, Baptist and Methodist than it would be between picking between Catholicism and Protestantism,
Yes.
right? Like there is a difference. I'm not saying, and it absolutely does matter. I'm not saying it doesn't. But the basic authority structure is more or less the same.
Yes.
So this is like I think Eric Ibarra again, who his name's going to come up a lot because he's a really good scholar on this, and I've been reading him recently. Uh, he mentioned that like honestly, if he wasn't Catholic, he'd probably be Coptic, which is the Church of Alexandria, the See of Alexandria. And the reason he gave for this was that when it comes to the papal claims, the Coptic are at least more consistent in that since they broke away earlier, like they have agreed to less. But that's not that I'm actually going to get to that later, so we'll put that on pause and move on. So Protestantism, and again, we're not going into it now, so I'm just going to mention the reason without arguing for it. That is literally an entire probably multiple streams because you're Protestant and it would have to be broken down into subtopics.
Yep.
But
And again,
Protestant, yeah,
which is a
Protestant.
stream thing
Go
that
ahead.
we are doing. So it's
That's the Protestant versus Catholic. That's
yep.
literally what it is. So
Yep, yep.
Protestants. So I'm just going to mention that the main reason that I would reject Protestantism, and without arguing in for this point in any way, just stating it baldly, is because I reject sola scriptura, and I don't see evidence that modern Protestantism was practiced or understood by early Christianity. And I have found the theological objections of Protestantism to Catholicism to be largely baseless. All of these are things that could be massively unpacked, right? Like each
Yes.
point could be unpacked, but I'm just telling you, like, I'm not Protestant. That's what you need to know. Uh, so between Orthodoxy and Catholicism, I need to be completely honest here, where while there was a time Protestantism was considered seriously by me as an alternative, this was back in high school, uh, I never did seriously consider Orthodoxy. And the reason for this is nothing profound. It was simply not widespread enough, like in the discourse, to make my radar. The great discussion that was going on was almost entirely Protestants responding to Catholics and vice versa. Orthodox barely got brought up. However, I do think that in the modern day and under the Francis papacy, Orthodoxy demands to be taken seriously and treated with respect. And I agree with this. To be clear here, and I want to get this out of the way now, I'm not speaking for Ben, obviously, but I consider Orthodoxy a very much a Christian church. And if you are Orthodox, you are Christian. As a Catholic, I would say you have the sacraments as well. Uh, Right? Like, I absolutely hold to that with Orthodoxy. I am not saying that Orthodox are like, I'm not putting Orthodoxy on the level of Mormonism or Jehovah's Witnesses, who I don't consider actual Christian churches. Uh, like, I think that they are absolutely Christians. So, and I think it does need to be taken seriously. So I have looked into it more. So why am I actually not Orthodox? Like, now that I am sitting and seriously thinking it over, hey, this Francis guy, he's got a lot of problems. I have issues with him. So why not Orthodoxy? What are the issues? Uh, and I'm going to arrange my reasoning here from my weakest objections to the strongest. And the weak objections are very, I'm thinking of how to put it. Yeah, the weak objections, like, you might hear them and you might go, oh, come on, like, that's not a good reason to be Orthodox. And I would agree. It's not a good reason on its own not to be Orthodox, but, or to be Orthodox, sorry, but it might be but it's part and parcel of a larger package. So, my first reason is that the regional character of Orthodoxy bothers me. Now, I have no doubt the Orthodox churches will welcome an Italian. Uh, but the fact is, the churches divide themselves on largely nationalistic and regional grounds. Yeah, as you've mentioned before, Slovak churches, right? Things like that. Russian churches, Ukrainian churches. This strikes me as unnecessarily divisive in regards to the true church. Now, this on its own is not a reason, just, oh, I don't like it. You're too nationalistic. Like, yeah, but there's an Orthodox church in my hometown, right? Like, if I wanted to, I am absolutely no doubt they would let me go there and they would welcome me as much as they could. But that hyper regional character of it and is something that definitely makes me a little bit uncomfortable. Like, you shouldn't be that discriminatory, right? Even in appearances. So, not a great reason, would not be enough to make me not Orthodox on its own, but it contributes to the pile. So, the second reason, this is a little bit stronger, but is again, I would argue, not enough on its own. Orthodox are virtually incapable of responding to modern theological issues. So, their structure simply does not allow for it. Now, what I mean by this is this. If you ask a member of any Orthodox church what their position on contraception is, you will get a different answer depending on the person. There was I think the manual, like the theological manual for the Greek Orthodox textbook in America, on the subject of contraception specifically. And the reason I'm picking on this is because artificial contraception, while it has been around, in the manner where it is almost 100% effective, as in today, or like effective most of the time where you could be confident in it, is a relatively recent thing, like 20th century. And the Orthodox Church's manual, Greek Orthodox Church of America's like theological textbooks literally changed from the contraception is not at all permissible to, traditionally contraception is not considered permissible, but maybe it'll, maybe it's a difficult question, and maybe in certain circumstances, to like what it says today, which is, contraception is a matter of individual conscience, right? Like, basically, they have completely caved in on the question of contraception. Uh, so that's one of the issues of orthodoxy to me. And if you ask an individual orthodoxy will tell you, oh no, contraception's absolutely immoral under orthodoxy. You will have orthodox who will say, well, you got to ask your priest, and you will have orthodox who say, oh, I just think it's moral. Yeah, like I don't have an issue with it, and they can't tell you what their actual what orthodoxy teaches on the subject. Now, again, what does this actually mean? Right? What does it mean for whether or not orthodoxy is the one true church or not? Well, the answer is maybe God did not establish the church in that way. I mean, that's basically the Protestant, you know, position. Like, he didn't establish it with a method of deciding things, with a magisterium, right? So that's not itself a decider, but it does give me pause. As a Catholic, uh, you can contrast the contraception question to the Catholic Church, which addressed it very directly. It addressed it with a document that came out by the Pope Paul VI, known as Humanae Vitae. So, Humanae Vitae, Pope Paul VI was a controversial pope. He, I think, recently got canonized, but he was a controversial pope because he was in charge of, like, implementing Vatican II largely. And he was the person who came out with the Novus Ordo Mass, which is the modern non-Latin Mass, right? He put together the committee, and they put together this new Mass, and he was the guy who was in charge for all of this. He also was notorious for being very wishy-washy, and he put together a theological commission to investigate the question of contraception in the modern day and what the Catholic Church should say about it. So, they did it. They came out with their results, and they told the Pope, we think the Catholic Church should change its teaching. Or, to be more specific, well, we think that modern contraception differs in such a way from the historical practice of how people have contracepted in the past, that we should just change it. Like that it doesn't qualify as part of the old time Christian prohibitions against contraception. Pope Paul VI said, yes, thank you very much. I'll take your stuff into account. And then he came out with Humanae Vitae, where he said artificial contraception is absolutely forbidden. And this is one of the major differences with Catholicism. Like it or not, say what you want, do what you want. But from now on, if you are a Catholic and you say, I am okay with artificial contraception, I will artificially contracept, you are going against the explicit written teaching of the church. It is clear, it is written down, it is there, and the church has responded very directly to a modern theological issue. And the Orthodox Church can't do that. Is this itself I'm trying to think of how to put it. Is this itself like a knockout argument against orthodoxy? No, because maybe God just didn't set up his church in that way to respond in such a way. Maybe he meant for you to dig through the church fathers or dig through the Bible, But the fact of the matter is, the Catholic Church can do that. So that does matter to me, to an extent. My third position, this is where it gets a little more serious, and this is where I actually think, this is something that definitely makes me really hesitate from being Orthodox. My reading and research into the Orthodox objections to a number of Catholic positions, and I'm specifically thinking of the Immaculate Conception of Mary and Purgatory, which ironically, by the way, are both positions that Protestants do not hold for the most part. But anyway, these strike me as arguing, even if unintentionally, in sort of bad faith. Now, let me clarify what I mean here. It's not that I think that the Orthodox are lying, but I do think that there's an attitude among the Orthodox of no, that's a Catholic thing. We don't believe that. So, Catholics, I notice, will make concessions to the Orthodox, but whether due to centuries of bitterness or stubbornness or a determinedness to have their own identity, Orthodox will not make concessions to Catholicism. This is fine, but this happens even with exceptions that they should make. Exceptions where you would go okay, but you actually do agree on this point. So, an anecdote here. I watched a debate and it was an interesting debate if you like this sort of thing, which I do because I'm a theology nerd, right? Between a Catholic apologist and an Orthodox apologist on the subject of purgatory. It was William Albrecht was the Catholic apologist, and the Orthodox apologist was like Father Kappas, maybe. I might be wrong about that. But either way, look up William Albrecht Purgatory Orthodox debate, Pints with Aquinas, and you will find it very easily. And I do recommend the debate for being quite an interesting time if you like that sort of thing. Uh, they got along well. It was a good, like, robust debate. Uh, but there's at the end of the debate, the Orthodox apologist, who I feel bad about forgetting his name because like he was I don't really have anything bad to say about him. Like he seemed like an honest, good person. But anyway, the Orthodox apologist basically conceded. He like in his final address, he basically said like, yeah, do we believe that there's a state for people who are not in heaven but also not going to hell and who need to be purified of their sins? Yeah, we agree with that, but it's not purgatory. And the Catholic apologist quite correctly said, like, my brother in Christ, what you just described was purgatory, like down to the particulars. Uh, and then he goes, but we don't believe in a literal fire. And he's like, you think we meant a literal fire? Like, we never meant a literal fire. Like, it's a metaphor, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, maybe it's literal. Like, I'm not dead, but it's
I
a
mean,
metaphor.
even most Protestants will admit there's a moment of judgment where, you are redeemed by Christ if you are, a Christian after death. Like, we don't say that it's, a mountain where people are purified by their sins, but, even Protestants will say that there is a step between death and your eternal reward. It's just that, it's not.
Right.
Pure.
Theological particulars and whatever, but it's just the matter of like he described the Orthodox position, and then he goes like, but it's not what the Catholics believe. And then William Albrecht's response was basically like, but yeah, yes, it is. Like, I don't know what you like. What do you mean? That's there was more to that too, like the Immaculate Conception as well. It's like, do we believe that Mary was sinless throughout her entire life from the moment of her conception? Do we believe, well, yeah, we do, but do we believe in the Immaculate Conception? Absolutely not. How dare you? And then Catholic will be like, you're starting fights here where like we don't want to start a fight,
Right.
And there's more to it than that too. Like the whole filioque controversy. This is one thing that really does bother me about the Orthodox Church. The Catholic Church over the years is willing to make concessions on this point. So I'm going to talk about Eastern Catholicism in a little bit, but Eastern Catholicism and Byzantine Catholicism specifically, which is the one that's most similar to the Eastern Orthodoxy everybody knows, the one with the beards and the incense, right? But Eastern Catholicism, I have been to Eastern Catholic Divine Liturgies, Byzantine Catholic Divine Liturgies, their term for a mass, right? And they don't say the Filioque in the Nicene Creed. Like, they take it out. They go, so Filioque, for those who don't know, means and the Son in Latin. It was an addition made to the Nicene Creed specifically to combat Arianism and to assert the divinity of the Son. Orthodox tend to have two objections to this. One on, like, sort of legalistic grounds and one on theological grounds. The legalistic ground is, well, the Pope doesn't have the right to just unilaterally change the creed. And the theological ground is, also, like, the theology is wrong. Now, filioque is something I have legitimately tried to study, and it is so convoluted, and the differences get so, like, minute and hair-splitting that for the life of me, you cannot convince me that this is something that's going to affect the day-to-day life of most Christians. Orthodox try to argue it. Like, they will try to argue, like, no, this is something that really matters and is super important. And I'm sorry, I just can't. I can't do it. But, mostly, though, what I'm trying to get at is that the Catholic Church has made the concession here. If you are in an Eastern Catholic Church, they go, okay, fair enough, you don't need to say the Filioque, right? Like, it is not required that you put it in your liturgy. It's not required that you say it. John Paul II, when he was Pope, when he would go and serve at divine liturgies, which happens occasionally, he would not say the Filioque. But Orthodox will not accept that. They go, no, the Filioque is a heresy. It is absolutely wrong. They won't make any sort of concession there. Uh, and this goes on to other things as well. Like, do Catholics and Orthodox agree on original sin? I mean, to be honest with you, I think that they do, but I think that the Orthodox like try and nitpick these holes that are like, practically speaking, when you get down to the nitty gritty of like, but what are we really saying that is the most important thing? I don't think that there is a fundamental difference there. The real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. You know, like we don't agree with transubstantiation. We just agree that Christ is actually and really substantially present in the bread and wine. Well, then what do you think transubstantiation is? No, well, we don't like the Thomistic language. And it's like, okay, so you don't like the Thomistic language, right? Like, fine, I guess, right? I can understand that. But the fact of the matter is, the substance of what we believe, like, you're disagreeing with something that we really should not be disagreeing about. Uh, and this is what I have written down on their Trinitarian theology is so functionally similar that the objections to the Filioque become almost entirely academic and unpractical. Orthodox will more or less not admit to any of this,
Yeah.
and I think it's a serious issue. Now, with that said, I am speaking in generalities. Bradford Walker just wrote, in practical terms, I've never met an Orthodox I could not get along with. You know, I'm sure that's true. I'm sure I'm dealing, like he mentions, online orthobros, and he's absolutely right. Like, I'm sure, you know, this is a largely online issue, but I feel like when you can make concessions and the concessions can work and that you're still holding out, you know, thousands of years later. Like, I've had discussions with online Orthodox who very legitimately, uh, they very legitimately are still mad about the sacking of Constantinople by the Crusaders. Like, they have actually brought it up to me in conversation. Now, leaving aside the fact that this was back in what, like, I don't even know, the 1200s?
Yeah, it
A
was like
long,
12 something.
yeah, long time ago. What they don't, you know, what's not mentioned here is like, even if you really want to get into this, which I don't think you should, by the way, like, I think this is a bad line of discussion, but the Pope condemned it as soon as he heard about it. Like, as soon as he heard about it, he condemned it. Like, this is not a Catholic Orthodox issue. Like, why are you turning it into a Catholic Orthodox issue? Yeah, but that's kind of my issue. And this is the fourth and most important reason that I have specifically for not being Orthodox, which is I think that over time the fundamental issues between Orthodoxy and Catholicism have boiled down to the Pope, right? What is the role of the Pope? What is the authority of the Pope? I think that the papal claims are biblical and historical. So, biblical. There's a great book by Joe Heschenmeyer, who the Cordial Catholic YouTube channel. He's done like live streams with Protestants and things that are good, you know, good stuff. Back and forth, respectful type debates that I actually recommend either Protestants or Catholics to hear. You know, like, but that he's done on papal authority and stuff like that. He wrote a book called Pope Peter. He made a pretty convincing case that a lot of like the Catholic claims on this are there, but I think that the papal claims are biblical and historical. So I'm going to take this opportunity to clarify something that has been said in the past because I want to make it clear like why I said this and what I mean when I say it. You know, I've mentioned to Ben that like, oh, I won't argue that for the church through the Bible, right? Because then my reasoning for this, and this is kind of important to the discussion, which is why I'm going through it now. So it's a good opportunity to like get this cleared up. My reasoning for doing this is not because I don't think it can be done. It's because I think that through the Bible, you can establish that a church was created, and you can establish a very broad structure, though the specifics were obviously not worked out yet. Therefore, I think that from there, you need to look at how the early Christians viewed that church and how Christianity was practiced in order to decide, right, what
Yes.
is the church. So when I go like, I'm not going to argue again, you know, for some, I don't believe you need the Bible alone to argue for this. So I'm not going to use the Bible alone. I think you can see like, are there bishops and things in the Bible? Well, I think it's clear that there is something there with the laying on of hand, whatever. But like, what it actually is, you need to look at the historical record. right? So that is my point. And this is where I get to with orthodoxy. If you're looking at the claims of orthodoxy and Protestantism, and I think, by the way, you can even admit this as a Protestant and go, well, I reject both. But looking in history at which of the two is more consistent, I think the papal claims are consistently made throughout history. I am thinking of, I don't have the councils memorized, but I know that these are mentioned. The uh, letter of Pope Agatha was read out at an ecumenical council that more claims. And by the way, by the papal claims, I am referring to claims of papal supremacy, papal infallibility, right? So supremacy means they have juridical power over the whole church. Like they can appoint bishops, they can remove bishops, they can laicize, stuff like that. And papal infallibility refers to the ability that when they make an official statement on faith and morals, they are protected from error. So that these claims have been made consistently throughout history. And I don't think you necessarily need to be a Catholic to recognize that between the two positions, the Catholic has presented itself very consistently up to the point of the Great Schism. Now, remember that the Great Schism was between the Church of Constantinople and the Church of Rome. It wasn't between all Orthodox churches. The Coptic Church of Alexandria had broken off long before that at the Council of Chalcedon, or Chalcedon. Chalcedon. I've heard many different things for how to pronounce that council. Uh, but the fact of the matter is that that the papal claims up to the point of the Great Schism had been made a lot, like the Tome of Saint Leo, the Letter of Agatha, and the Formula of Hermistus, of Pope Hermistus. Uh, These are all make the claims to papal authority, to papal supremacy, to papal infallibility, not using the exact language that was used by Vatican I, but the claims are made, and they're accepted by the Eastern bishops. So then you go, well, then why aren't you just Coptic Orthodox? Oh, well, the reason I'm not Coptic Orthodox, you could go back to the first three reasons. And also the fact that they were the only church that broke off, and right now it looks as if they're willing to even reunite with some churches, I think is notable as well. So, there's that. But the point is, I think simply that historically, oh, and by the way, the other thing is that the Coptic Orthodox, number one, also have a faction that rejoined the Catholic Church. That's the Coptic Catholic Church. And at any rate, they never really provided any arguments for or against their schism on papal grounds. Like, the papacy was not the reason that they became schismatic. They became schismatic for Christological reasons. Now, as the years have gone on, it has become more or less agreed, and I agree with this, by the way, that those Christological reasons really don't exist. Like, that Christologically, they're Orthodox, lowercase o, right? But the language being used, there was like a language barrier, and this led to an unfortunate break. So, plus all those other issues with Orthodoxy do remain with Coptic Orthodoxy. So, the one last thing that I want to note is that the schism is that there is a real sense here. Now, by the way, if you're Orthodox and you're listening to this, and I doubt you are because nobody's mentioned it in the comments and nobody's yelled at me yet, but the schism between the Orthodox and Catholic churches has, for all intents and purposes, been resolved in a very real way. And this is where I'm going to talk about Eastern Catholicism. So the various Orthodox churches are now in communion with Rome, just with large sections of them still broken off. There are even Eastern churches in communion with Rome that have never broken away. So that is referring to the Maronite Church. So not a lot of people know this. Catholics probably know, and Ben probably knows because I've mentioned it to him before, which is how he would have probably learned about it. There is such a thing as Eastern Catholicism. There are 23 what are called in Latin sui juris churches in communion with Rome. In other words, they are not considered heretical, they are not considered schismatic, they're considered fully lowercase o Orthodox, in communion Catholic churches, just as valid as the Roman Church. Right? The Roman Church is one of these churches. There's also the Byzantine Catholic Church. The Byzantine Catholic Church re-entered communion with Rome. They were part of the Constantinople Church, I believe. The Coptic Catholic Church was part of the Alexandrian Church. I'm trying to think of it. Ukrainian Catholic Church was part of the, I think, the Russian Church. I could be wrong. And so on, though. And they all left Orthodoxy to re enter communion with Rome. And there was even one church, the Maronite Catholics from Lebanon, who were like rediscovered after years of separation, for us to learn that they never actually broke off communion with the Pope. Like that they were always just in communion with the Pope. We just hadn't had contact with them. And they re entered and they were like, yeah, we never left. So there's even like, in a sense, an Eastern church that was never Orthodox. Like that was never part of the schismatic churches. Yeah, or if you don't like the term schismatic, that was never a part of the Eastern churches. That was always in communion with Rome. So this is one thing. I agree that the Orthodox liturgy, and I'm specifically thinking of the divine liturgy of the Byzantine, the Constantinople, right, Greek Orthodox, is beautiful. I actually really love visiting the Divine Liturgy when I have time. Yeah, I think it's wonderful. It's a sung through liturgy. It's very very different from the Roman liturgy. Absolutely beautiful. I think their theology can be very beautiful. Uh, I think that they have like a mystical tradition of prayer that I do think people have criticized sometimes for like being too similar to like Hindu mysticism, but my understanding from what I've read on it is that they don't believe anything that is not un lowercase o orthodox, right? So, and I think that there's some really beautiful parts to their like mystical tradition of prayer. I think the fact that their fasting is tends to be, I should say, tends to be more intense than the Western Church is something commendable. I think the fact that they've maintained their liturgy as well as they have, when the Catholic Church kind of has not, is very commendable. Uh, but I also think that like you can a lot of the stuff you can just now get in Catholicism because there are parts of the churches that have just gone back in communion with Rome. So what are we talking about here? Like it's yeah, I guess that's where I'll stop it. I do want to say that I don't mean to sound flippant by going, well, the schism is over. Like, obviously, the vast majority of these churches are still not in union with Rome, and I think that's terrible. I think Christian unity should be something that is striven for. I am just saying that nowadays, if you were Orthodox and you wanted to join with Rome, you wouldn't necessarily need to. I'm trying to think of how to put it. You wouldn't necessarily need to do anything radical like, completely join the Roman Church. You could just join your Orthodox Church, but the part that's in communion. Like, those churches have parts of them that are very much in communion. I don't know. It is what it is.
All right.
And that is my spiel on it. I'm curious, like I'm sure that your reasoning is very different from mine because I'm looking at it from the perspective of I have rejected Protestantism on these grounds. Therefore, these are the two that are open to me. Between these two, why would I kick Catholicism? And I'm sure that you have very different reasons for it.
Yeah, pretty much. Uh, there's a few things that really come up um, quite often that might be kind of shocking because I do view Christians especially as being not of the world but of the world in the world, and that requires some things with some sort of, I don't know what you call it, not diplomacy, but like there's a certain amount of living that has to be done there. And my first sort of big sort of thing why I'm not orthodox in this day and age is that it's a bit of a meme. Um, One of the things that you can see throughout history is that the Orthodox Church does remain fairly static. Um, there's a lot of competing ideas that run around. I'm going to bring up one in a bit. Uh, but in the end, they don't really burn out heresy in the same way that a Catholic would in their own way if they could, or a Protestant does within his own church. Churches blow up all the time in the Protestant world, um, and they scatter people out over things of heresy. Quite frankly, once the boomers started aging out of their church, or calcifying is a better way to put it, the churches stopped splitting over things like the drapes as much as they used to. The meme is real. I experienced some of that. But the thing with Orthodoxy is that there's an increasement to it, that even though they put up a unified face, they don't really self critique in the same way that a Protestant or a Catholic does. And a lot of people, when they enter into Orthodoxy, they don't understand the theology or the ideas behind it, or even a lot of the how do I want to put it? Like, there's a whole lot of baggage that exists that's within sort of orthodoxy that people aren't willing to grapple with. Sometimes people bring up things like the horrifying persecution that they experienced under communism in the Soviet Union. Which by the way, I recommend watching Radlib's left wing terror video on that. It's absolutely amazing, heartbreaking, because a lot of their best men, their saints, their workers were killed by communists. Um, to the point where I was reading, that essentially they had been doing some missionary work, but now, and this is also one of my points, they have almost no missionary work. Their missionary work is very low. And by the by, I do not really respect internet missionary work. If you get saved off of a stream that we do, glory to God. But quite frankly, this isn't. The it isn't the same as being present in somebody's life.
We're not putting our blood, sweat, and tears on the line with this. Yeah.
Yes,
Uh,
there's
I'm
no
also,
consequence.
by the
Uh,
way, to your point, like not to your point about orthodoxy and like their disputes and things like that. A lot of people nowadays, maybe they do realize this, but if you're not following orthodoxy like I sometimes do, you might not realize that, like, for all this talk of like the Orthodox, keeping their liturgy and keeping their doctrines, they are still schisming now in the 20th century,
yep.
in the decade. Like, this is a thing that is currently happening. Now, the Catholic Church does have its share of doctrinal disputes and people who are going into schisms and things like that. But when that happens, like, it's generally, isolated people who are leaving and joining these extremely fringe groups. Whereas with the Orthodox, it's like, the Church of Russia and the Church of Constantinople are no longer in communion.
Right.
So,
Uh,
it's a big thing.
Yep. And there's one recently where the Church of the Ukraine is no longer in communion with the Church of Russia over, well, you can guess, but it's like this stuff happens all the time, and but what it does is that it destroys their ability to function as a unified force. It puts them in between the Protestant and the Catholic sort of sphere, where you have the million islands of the Protestants, with a few big chains, and the sort of mostly unified kingdom of the Catholics. And there's quite a few things with Catholicism that's schisming, but it doesn't remove papal authority in the way that people think of. If people leave a Protestant church, the pastor just has less people who are showing up for church every Sunday. If a whole church disappears off of one arm of the main Orthodox churches, that's like a new branch. And it hurts the sort of unity for it, and I think it really hurts their ability to function in the world for missionaries. I don't really view Catholics as missional in the same way that Protestants are, but the Catholics do have missionaries and whole groups that do missionary work. Um, and it's unfortunate like that. It's essentially less widespread than it is in Protestantism, but even then, only about 12% of Protestant churches actually have missionaries go from their churches. Maybe most of them do donate to missionaries, to be clear. But you're not going to see like people like rising up to go onto the mission. Mission trips notwithstanding. So that's kind of my first thing. Like their divisiveness, which a lot of new Orthodox converts and others kind of don't see, don't get, um, hurts them tremendously in dealing with sort of living in the world. Worse than in Protestantism, because if a church goes down in fire and flames, in Protestantism, it's a blip on the radar. It may affect 200 people, but there's millions of Orthodox
You
Christians.
also mention, by the way, this is just briefly because like nothing like you're saying is wrong, but the Catholic Church literally has like religious orders devoted specifically to mission work.
Yes.
Uh,
No, no,
you know,
no.
they,
What I'm saying is that like it's there's a difference between every man have like it's like we don't use orders. Like what I'm trying to say is that
yep,
like
yep.
there's there's a difference between an orderly procession and a people's movement is what I'm trying to say. I get that's a bad way to put it. That's a very bad way to put it. Like I'm trying to say
I get your point though. Yeah.
right. So it's like I'm not like criticizing the Catholics heavily for this. I'm just saying that the average Catholic is less likely to be missional than the average Protestant. So, and I think Orthodox is even less than that. There's a lot of stories online about people visiting Orthodox churches and find that they're closed. A lot of stories, not closed like, but like closed to them until they sort of really get deep into it. Other times they're very welcoming. They welcome it, welcome newcomers, that sort of thing. And I think that mostly comes to how good the priest is. Since even though they did survive the horrific, murderous communist attacks, they were infiltrated to hell by the KGB, and I think that infiltration is worse than what was done to the Catholic churches by communists and others. So you have that. I'm gonna sort of so I combined a couple of my points. I'm gonna move on to sort of a theological thing. One of the ones that I really personally despise as a general like umbrella of heresy is anything and everything that comes between me and Jesus Christ on the cross. I died and buried and resurrected and all that good stuff. Anything that comes between it to me is absolutely unacceptable, and it's a way broader idea than people understand, because I do put things like the Immaculate Conception of Mary in that, because of how it interferes with um, what's the word I want original sin. If every person is born with original sin, but Mary does not, it interferes with the idea that everyone is born with original sin. If it's special, why is it special? Why can it not be transferred? Why was the blah 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 blah? We know David sinned, right? There's proof in the bloodline that sin is in the family in the original sense. Like it's one of those things where there's a lot of things to it that kind of get complicated that I'm not going to get into. But the reason why I don't like it, the reason why I don't accept it, is because it interferes with salvation. The Orthodox have quite a few of these that are not accepted in the mainstream. Besides what they agree with on Catholics, a big thing that they and by the way, I don't want to ever imply that Mary was not a virgin when she had Jesus Christ. I want to be clear on that. You know, just because I say that Mary could sin does not mean I deny any of the prophecies about her virgin birth or even, some of the things related to her in her relationship with Jesus Christ. I just want to put that out there as a PSA. You know, co-mediatrix, no. Queen of Heaven, nah. But don't. If anyone's listening to this and typing or something, don't put words in my mouth here. Um, you know, they have all the same things, but one of the things that sort of is an example of this that is very unique to Orthodoxy is the idea of toll booths, like toll booth purgatory. Anthony talked a little bit about this, like aerial toll booths, it's called. Uh, and you can look it up. Aerial toll houses is another way to do it. And it's basically in between you getting to heaven. Demons are going to be sitting there, like I guess a bank manager or something, in the clouds, and basically going, "Hey, buddy, you really liked money. I'm going to give you $100,000 to go to hell." And I'm being funny with it, but it's like each side, demons are trying to destroy the souls that are going up into heaven, and you have to give up some instances of it. You have to give up your sins. In other instances of it, you have to, deny, object to the demons, and so on and so forth. There's some variety in it. But quite frankly, it if I can lose my salvation just because a demon plays a slick trick with his words, what use of the salvation is there? Like, all of a sudden, stupid people are falling by the wayside just because, the demons speak well. Uh, you
Yeah,
know,
to be honest, I don't really know a lot about toll booths except as a general idea that they are kind of a thing.
yeah,
Uh, like interestingly, in the purgatory debate, when they asked both sides about toll booths, they just kind of shrugged and said it's like, I don't really think about it much. Like the Catholic was like, well, he goes, to be honest, he goes, I just don't really see any reason to believe it because it's not biblical. And
right,
the Orthodox priest was like, kinda, yeah. Which, by the way, yes, if you're wondering, the corollary is that both agreed that they thought that purgatory was biblical, but that's
right,
an
right.
entire other can of worms. But they were just like, yeah, I just don't see any evidence of this, and they just both kind of agreed and moved on. It was kind of interesting.
And I'm going to say this, unless there is some canon in the apocryphal books of the Bible, there's nothing in the mainline books of the Bible. The closest thing that's brought up often is Ephesians 6:12 through 13. Um, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in the high places. Wherefore, take unto you the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to withstand the evil day, and having done all to stand. So I just want to go over this real quick, because again, I am a Protestant. I believe explicitly in context scripture. All right, some person taking out a verse does not impress me. I can do that too, and I can use it to justify anything I want. Um, if I'm smart with it. So let's. This is the famous armor of God passage. And there's some verses here. It's basic advice from Paul. Fathers, don't provoke your children to wrath. Servants, be obedient. With fear and trembling, and singleness of your heart as unto Christ. And I needed that. I needed that. Oh man, when you don't like your job a bit, but it goes down. Ye masters, be kind to them, forbear threatening them. And then it goes, finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and the power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, so on and so forth. Verse 14, stand therefore, having your loins girded about with truth, and having the breastplate of righteousness. And then you have the armor of God. Verse 18, praying always with all prayer and supplication in the Spirit, and watching thereunto with all perseverance and supplication for all saints. Um, and for me, that utterance may be given unto me, that I may open my mouth boldly to make known the mystery of the gospel. And then he talks about himself for a little bit. And I don't mean that in a bad way, I mean that in a good way. So you can see here in context that these verses are about the life we live now. In fact, there is even a contrast between one of the verses that uh, is used often for the prayers to the saints, with all perseverance and supplication for all saints, which I'm not going to get into right now. Not going to get into it. We will have to actually do a Protestant versus Catholic one on this, someday. But you can see here that this is in the world of the living. The chapter begins, not that chapters matter too much in the intention of what Paul was writing, but there is a decent logical break there between chapters 5 and 6.
Yeah, pause and say I've never ever heard this verse used to argue for purgatory. The verse I've always heard was from, I believe, Corinthians, that you will be purified as if through fire, or something like that.
Send it to me in the
I'm
Discord
sorry, I
chat.
don't have you. I don't have the Protestant superpower of like exact memorization of verses. Uh,
No.
this is a Protestant superpower I greatly admire, but I believe that's the one that I've always heard that is used, and there are Catholics who accept that as an argument in favor, and Catholics who don't.
Right.
Uh, I think I've heard Albrecht and Lofton, I believe, do consider that, and the general idea is that that is referring. So this is like me going off a very vague quote and off of a memory, and so this is not really a real argument, and I'm not going to debate you on it. I'm just telling you what I've heard. And it is something like this. It's like that you will be purified, but as if through fire. And Paul is talking about the end times here. And the general Catholic and Orthodox interpretation of this is that while he is talking about the end times, that also applies in a general way to everybody's individual judgment, and then it will be done on a wide scale, to all at the end times. You can extrapolate.
Yeah.
However, you would need to talk to like a theologian to really break out this argument, and for me to make it properly, I would need to sit down, look at what scholars say about the verse, and like how it's generally interpreted. 'Cause it's kind of a mysterious verse.
Yeah.
Uh,
And
to be honest, at least it comes across that way to me.
yeah, and this is again outside the context of what I'm really going for here. I'm just
I just mentioned because like I've never heard Ephesians used in that way, but like maybe
yeah.
I'm sure I believe you. I'm sure somebody somewhere has,
So
but
this
I
this
haven't.
the source I'm using right now is where is it? It's an Orthodox wiki, so it's like, okay, this is a list of
Interesting.
beliefs, and it's
Interesting.
just
I've never seen it used that way, so that's interesting. That's on their wiki.
yeah. So hopefully, it's an accurate portrayal of them. It is connected to Saint Ignatius Brianchaninov. I'm not even joking. That sounds like it, and it's in Slavic. So
Ignatius Brian. Holy crap! When I start to Google it, it comes up. Ignatius Brian.
did you forget to turn off your Alexa, Anthony?
Ignatius Brian Chaninoff. No, he's from the 1800s.
Yep.
So he's like recent.
I know.
Interesting. That's more recent than most Orthodox.
But I'd like
Well,
to. But I'd like to continue.
keep
Uh,
going. I'm sorry.
so they do say that there is arguments from the church fathers for aerial toll houses. Um, a couple of them is Saint Eustratius, third century martyr, who I've never heard of before. Um, this is according to one of the people who argue for this. But the point is that there's a lot of choices made that sort of allow for this heresy to spread without the proper checks. There are quite a few sainted what's his names or venerated holies somethings that people do heavily jump on as proof. But the thing is that like it doesn't it doesn't do anything for people who are actually who think deeply into the theology of a thing to um, to sort of grapple with. It also means that, unlike in Catholic and Protestant circles, where a heretical priest is very obvious, if you even have a basic understanding of Scripture, you will be able to tell when a priest or a pastor is bad. For example, when I went down to uh, Chincoteague the first time, I have a policy of those who are hosting me, I go to their church. Uh, we went to this Catholic church, which was supposed to be very good. The priest was excellent. John C. Wright, who was my host at the time, saying, "Oh, this is the best thing ever." So we sit down, and the guy goes, "The real miracle of feeding the 5,000 was sharing," which no, it is not. And of course, I hit it. I was very gracious. But, I did have kind of a grin the entire time. And it was obvious. I've also listened to pastors who will not touch sin for the life of them. A pastor must sometimes talk about sin, especially if they're preaching Jesus Christ on the cross. If you cannot say the reason why Christ is on the cross and call even your own servants in the choir to repentance, it doesn't, it doesn't help anyone. It doesn't bring anything to there. Father Seraphim Rose is a really big sort of name for this particular heresy, and it's one of the things where it abuses what might have actually been a pretty decent ministry, especially for formerly homosexual men. Um, though sometimes I look into his life and I see things and I'm like, I'm not sure people are getting what I'm getting out of it. Like, there's a little bit of, I don't want to say like it was fakery that he was homosexual for the rest of his life, but he didn't seem to be acting on it. But at the same time, it's like one of those things where there's just these gaps, these lapses where there aren't in normal sort of priestly ministries, and it people take to this and it's like, well, this guy, you have to pray to this guy. When in actuality, this guy was arguing that devils can take you out of the hand of God post death, no matter what you've believed, and throw you down into hell. And some people might say, well, you weren't really Christian. But it's like, if they weren't really Christian, why not just take them when they're dead? Like there's always like these logical shortenings that come up for it. Like, sure, it's a dramatic scene. You're dying. You're being escorted by angels up, and there's demons coming to take you. Like, it's not undramatic. But it's doubtful that this is how it is, especially since the verses used to explain it are very slim, very slim. Like I mentioned later on in there, there's more for the supplication to the saints than there is for that. Um, the wording and verses used are abused in this situation, to the point where some people are not calling it not just a heresy or a weird idea, but just a Gnostic heresy, something that interferes with the world and how it is, how it was created by God to make the world itself evil. And you keep going deeper into this, but I don't want to. I don't like. I've said my piece on it. It interferes with salvation. If you can lose your salvation post death, there's no point to it. Um, you might say, well, you would, if you were really saved, you wouldn't turn aside. Well, that feels weird. That feels weird to say. Like, oh, if you're perfect, you'll be fine anyway. Like, it might as well be
So this,
Calvinist.
for the record, I would agree with you on, and like that's absolutely true, and it's something that's hammered home. Catholic teaching, like your fate is fixed at death.
Yep.
It is fixed at death.
Yep.
Where you are going to end up is fixed. Like that, nothing can happen that can change it. Uh, and you're absolutely right about this. Goes into, it's a different way of saying, I think, what I was saying about like orthodoxy has serious problems with like responding to, theological issues, right? Like I'm not saying that
Yep.
they have no way of doing it. But every time they try, it always seems to end in infighting and arguments because they don't have arbiters for it, and they don't really have even a way to decide what an arbiter would be or what it would look like. So, they've tried to have a pan-Orthodox council for years, and when they finally had one, it practically made things worse. Yeah. Uh, like the arguments that resulted were like nobody would accept it. Some groups did accept it, some didn't. They had no idea what they were doing. And like there is a serious problem in orthodoxy that is really not present in mainline Protestantism. There are fringe Protestant groups, or Catholicism of universalism. Like this is a huge thing in Orthodox. Like this is actually like sort of like you're saying with toll houses. Like it is a minority but fairly legitimate theological opinion being held by a large group of Orthodox. Yeah, like universalism, which I
Yep.
consider to be absolute heresy. I consider it to be clear heresy. I know that like David Bentley Hart is Orthodox and he argues in for universalism. He's a philosopher, if you don't know him. And a fairly good philosopher, to my understanding. He goes at it with Edward Fazer, who's like a Catholic Thomistic philosopher a lot, like a respected philosopher, and but like he's a huge universalist. Like it's a big thing with him that he's a universalist. This is a major, like this is a theological opinion that is held by a lot of Orthodox. In the
Yep.
Catholic Church, it is, you can claim very straightforwardly, like, no, this is a condemned heresy. It was condemned here, here, and here. You can't be a Universalist and be a Catholic. You just can't. Now, there are, you know, Catholics I don't want to say get around it because that makes it sound like I'm accusing people of bad faith, and I am not, to be clear. But, like, there are Catholics who take a very broad view of salvation, but even the Catholic broad view differs in a very substantial way from a Universalist view. So this is theologians like Hans von Balthasar, and it's been said in an altered way by Bishop Barron, who is a very popular Catholic theologian nowadays, and actually an actual bishop, uh, Robert Barron, and they have it the can all be saved view, and they would say Bishop Barron would, or the dare we hope view. That's what they called it, right? Like the idea that we can hope for all to be saved. However, there is a very substantial difference here. They would not, and I know Bishop Barron is very careful about this. He absolutely would not say that we can know that anyone is saved who, except like, we would say a Canaanite saint, but like for all intents and purposes, right? Anyone. We could not say for sure that anyone is saved. He would be very careful to say that. He would go like, no, I'm not saying everybody will be saved. He would say, I would hope and pray that everyone would be saved. And for that matter, I think that's just good practice. I mean, certainly we should hope for that. I don't think it's very likely. It seems wildly unlikely to me, but uh, sure, hope, right? Hope that God's will is done, and hope that his will is that all be saved. And if it's not, then everything works out for God's good. But that's a very different thing than the position of universalism, where you would say, like, no, like, only an evil God would damn people to hell. No, that is a heresy. That is heresy.
Yep.
That is extremely wrong. I don't even really agree. I disagree with the dare we hope view, and I wouldn't be surprised if one day in the future, the church works in centuries, so it might not be for a very, very long time, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's condemned one day. But, like, even that is a substantially different thing than, like, what is a significant minority Catholic or Orthodox belief. And that's the thing, too. Like, to be clear to the Orthodox, like, toll houses is not really a thing that a lot of Orthodox hold to, right? Like,
But it,
to my knowledge,
well,
however, it's a significant minority position.
yes. And it's one of those things where I'm not saying that it's as universal an idea as, say, papal infallibility within the Catholic Church. I'm just saying that this is a very clear heresy that has been fought over for hundreds of years at least, maybe even 1,000 plus, and for some reason they can't say that it's wrong like the Catholics say Pelagianism is wrong. And if the Protestants knew what
Or universalism.
the universalism is wrong, Protestants have a very clear non-universal stance in general, except for a couple of groups that are very nice and very well-meaning, but unfortunately are wrong in this particular sense. So, what I'm talking about with this stuff is more than just, some sort of, you know, sort of problem within the church, like Seventh day Adventists having church on Saturday, and for some reason, a huge amount of cults seem to come from Seventh day Adventist churches. No clue why, don't want to get into it. But Waco was part of those guys. They were like a cult of a cult of
Or
a
like
cult
a
of a cult.
weird break off from them.
Yeah, but like it's like I watched Wendigoo's thing. I never looked into it before, but he's like, okay, this guy was a student. This guy was a student. This like he was a breakaway of like 7 different breakaways. Like that's deep. That's how deep it is. But even then, it's pretty easy to say that he's a heretic. He wasn't the second coming of Christ. He was pretty, he was an antichrist in his own way. Um, but it's hard for people to sort of like think like that, talk like that. So then what happens is it's further complicated when they pursue sainthood for quite frankly undeserving individuals. Sure, all Christians who die and go to heaven are called the saints. Like, there's not really a big delineation post death for some of this stuff, but for action on earth, there's difference. But they venerate quite a few things that probably shouldn't be venerated in the way that they are. Like I said, there's some weird stuff with Father Seraphim Rose, who lived a life and he abandoned homosexuality, but they treat him like a saint, even though he is not a saint. He has miracles and he has icons and so on associated with him. Um, and it's the same way like throughout their history. Now, the problem comes in when you start to look into the theology of each of these people, and you see that maybe their theology was actually quite poor. That they had a weird and kooky belief like aerial toll houses, or that they were explicit Gnostics, or that they didn't have if they had a choice, they wouldn't. Pardon me. I gotta go take care of that. I will be right back.
Yeah, so while Ben is taking care of that, yeah, this is a different way of talking about like it's a similar issue as the one I have. Now, the reason I put the incapability of responding to theological issues, I put it relatively low on my list of objections, and the reason for this is that I consider it distinctly possible that like it is a live thesis to me that perhaps Christ just didn't set up his church in such a way that these objections were meant to be resolved in the way that they are in Catholicism, or they're not meant to be resolved by direct appeal to scripture as in Protestantism. Like, maybe that's just not the way he set up the church. Maybe he set up that you're just supposed to show obedience to your bishop. So I don't consider this like a knockout objection, but I do consider it a legitimate problem. The fact that the Orthodox today have major issues with schism. The Catholics don't have this issue. Now, there are issues with breakaway Catholics currently. Recently, with the death of Pope Benedict, there are, some groups of Catholics here and there who are going what's called sede vacantis, who believe that the See of Peter and the the See of Rome is vacant, right? And that's always been a position. Now it's just gotten larger because there were the people who believe that Benedict was the real pope and don't accept Francis as the real pope. But that is a substantially different thing than like a bishop coming out and a bishop saying and bringing his entire flock with him and going, we are breaking away from communion. This is something that the Orthodox are doing that's just not happening in Catholicism in the same way. And sure, that could change, but the fact that this is happening now, and like, you can't blame the Catholics for it. This is their issue, and things like that. Ben, are you back?
I am back.
All right, go ahead.
But yeah, and it's like this. There's a thing where there was a woman who had a vision of Mussolini in purgatory. She then it was spread that Mussolini, would get into heaven at a certain date and a certain time, which to me is all kinds of alarm bells. I know that they say this woman had many visions that came true, and so on and so forth. We're not talking about that, but the reason why that there's a little bit of an issue with it isn't because of a vision, isn't because of that. It's because that there is no the signs that Mussolini was a Christian is very slim for obvious reasons. And it's the same way with a lot of other actions. Whether or not people believe that such and such a man became a saint or not, many of these are not based on many miracles. Like even if people consider like certain chronicles and such suspect, there is quite a few bits of information on the life of Saint Nicholas. Um, and some people point out, well, the first thing about him punching Arius is like, from the 11th century. Okay, fine, but there's still plenty of evidence that he existed. That
Well, Nicholas, yeah, there's no question that Saint Nicholas was real.
right,
That's not even like that's not up for debate.
right,
Whether
but
he was
hold on.
actually at the Council of Nicaea is another story.
Yes, but it makes a fine little thing, and gives us a lot of fun. So I'm not going to die on that particular hill. But the thing is that the equivalency for that, why I brought it up between Saint Nick and Mussolini, is that it's like somebody said, I have Mussolini's boots, and they cured me of my foot fungus. He's clearly a Catholic saint. Like that would be ridiculous. No one would accept that. Even the most depraved, ayahuasca chewer, who thinks that it's cool to be high in church, would absolutely not believe that. Um, it's but it comes down to that sometimes. Sometimes, especially like I bring up Father Seraphim Rose, but he's just a very good example of this, where quite frankly I don't consider any of the things associated with them to be backed up or validated. It's the same with some of the miracles that are brought forward when a pope is given the seat of Saint Peter, where it's like, oh well, the blood turned to liquid in his hand. But to me, it's like you could just fake that with wax. There are waxes that melt very easily. He just holds it in his hand, prays for a few minutes. Oh, it's liquid. Like there's a whole lot of things that can pop up.
Yeah,
Hold on, let me.
it's interesting.
Let,
All right, finish your
sorry,
point. I'm
like,
sorry. No,
but
no, go ahead.
uh,
I'm agreeing with you. Don't worry.
yeah. Thank you. But there's a whole bunch of things that crop up in Christian circles that I would call like hucksterism. It's a grift, it's a grind, it's a fast paw. One of the things that often charlatan Protestant preachers use is they do like outdoor crusades and healings, where they heal somebody who's in a wheelchair, or they heal somebody who has some kind of weird deformity that just falls off them somehow. Oh, I don't know, just fell off. Like or Peter Popov, who was revealed in that famous Super Eye Patch Wolf video, to have his wife coaching him from a hidden earpiece, and so on and so forth. And he claimed it was the spirit telling him the secrets. So you get these things, right? And you look at it. In reality, if you are willing to be deceived by somebody's fast movements or somebody who really wishes Father Seraphim Rose was a saint, you're going to lose out on real spiritual growth and spiritual ideals. Uh, you know, I hate to bring up Mary so many times, but she is kind of the example of a lot of things that everyone can understand in a universal manner. But her rising into heaven does not have backup in Scripture. It is a tradition of the Church, of the Catholic Church specifically, and the Orthodox Church. I guess I don't care what their thing is on that. That she rose up. Now, it's pretty clear though that most of the sources agree she fell asleep at a certain point. And of course, Christians fall asleep, we do not really die. Um, which is, I accept that. I accept 100% that Mary is in heaven right now. Probably in very close proximity to her son. Not going to deny that. But there are things associated with her that I do deny. Um, some of the things with Our Lady, with the Lady of Guadalupe, is suspect, and I'm not going to talk about it now. It's not like the Shroud of Turin. The Shroud of Turin has very specific things that cannot be faked and could not have been faked when it was discovered. But under the Guadalupe thing, especially some of the shrouds produced, especially the famous one, there isn't the same burden of proof. However, for some of this stuff, I could see that somebody who was very intelligent, because remember, people were as intelligent then as they are now, could have created something to get people to really believe in some of the things associated with that. Um, there's a lot of statements that are made that were not backed up in the day, but were brought up later, or were, discovered at a later date and brought forward as proof. There's, a lot that goes on in these circles, in Christian circles, that is somebody faking something to get what they want out of it. Now, it could be anything from they just really liked Mary, or they had a weird vision of Mussolini, or he fought homosexuality for all of his life, and sometimes there's miracles and stuff associated with them that again, no proof. And I'm not saying that it needs to be a video of a miracle. I have seen miracles happen. I've seen healings happen. They happen. God does interact with the world today, now, very, very often. But when people want something and maybe they don't even have a good thing for it, they'll create out of whole cloth whole systems that justify it. And I think that both the Catholic and the Orthodoxy were really ramping it up. For example, fake relics. How many thumbs does Peter have? That sort of thing. Uh, which one's the real one, etc., etc. The Egyptians do it with mummies. The thing is that the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation largely killed that industry in the way that it was back then. Um, However, the Orthodox never went through that. There was never any checks and balances on their mystical interpretation of things. Ultimately, they did not have the logic that the Catholics naturally had, thanks to men like Thomas Aquinas, and quite frankly, thanks to the reaction to the Reformation, that would have given them a defense against hucksterism, against corruption from the inside. And I don't want to go too deep into this stuff even more, because then it's like, well, I gotta go find examples and stuff like that. And I don't want to do too many of those, because it gets weird sometimes. Because it's like, well, what do you do? Well, this guy was 1,000 years old, and then she burnt, or I think it's Saint Irene or something like that, daughter of a Byzantine emperor, killed all her enemies, and her sons were like, yeah, she's a saint. I don't think so. I think she was just a normal woman who,
I know who you're talking about.
or is it
Olga, maybe?
Saint Olga? Yeah, no, it is.
I know who you mean, though.
Yeah, and it's it's one of those things where it's like I don't believe that. I don't believe it. Like if somebody said, that a Borgia Pope was a saint, I would not believe that. For the simple reason is I know how he got into office, however good of a pope he was while in office, and so on and so forth. The this is kind of strange and meandering, but like the point is that the standard for truth for action is not there in the same way that it is for Catholic and Protestant circles, and especially Protestant circles. I cannot be sure of what's being taught to me or what is going on there. And if I cannot be sure of the theology I am receiving, then it is worse for me than it is for me to just live as a hermit on top of a rock with a Bible. Like I could go absolutely crazy on that, but at the very least I can point to the Bible and say that I read it in between the thes in John 3:16, or something stupid like that. People can reject that. People can't reject without sort of the will for truth things like, the real miracle of the feeding of the 5,000 with sharing, or that there are aerial toll booths that you have to go through, and if you don't make it through, oh, you're not saved, etc., etc. Um, and I guess that's kind of like the long and short of it, without continuing to rant like a maniac. Just because it's there's a lot to it that does need to be answered. I do believe, while I am no universalist, I do believe that every church must have an answer as to why they are not X, Y, or Z. For Protestants, it's very easy. I am a Protestant, or an evangelical is more accurate, but I am a Protestant because I am not in communion with the Church of Rome, and I will not be in the Church of Rome for these reasons. Pope, Mary, miracles, history, etc. And that's just a good glance over them. But when it comes to Orthodox and Catholic, from the outside perspective, to me, that there's only one group being stubborn, the Orthodox, um, and one group trying to bring them in. And here's the kicker with it: it would be fine for them to be their own independent thing, except that they're kind of jerks about it. So it removes, any sort of sympathy card, any sort of, like wise thing to them, when I know that what they do is, if they don't want to be in a discussion, an ecumenical council or whatever, they just go, look, you killed some of our saints in 1432, and we're still angry about that. Goodbye, and then they walk out. That's literally a thing that happened in one particular meeting, where they essentially they came in, sat down. Oh, you insulted us on Twitter, and because of this, we will now leave, and they left, and nothing got done. So it all just kind of, you know, was for nothing. All money spent, all this time spent, and it was a rude gesture. It wasn't proper playing by the rules for some of this stuff. And I think that a lot of people miss out when they're going for, oh, the Ortho Bros, oh, Jay Dyer, oh, this, oh, that, when in reality, they aren't.
I do not like Jay Dyer.
Neither do I. When they're not actually producing, real spiritual growth. Real spiritual growth isn't, I'm going to the right church, is, are my actions ordered according to God's will? Recently, I had a question, of my pastor, pastor, well, please advise me. I am thinking of doing this to earn money so that I am no longer a poor boy from a poor family. Um, and his response was, well, the will of God isn't just, uh, you know, him telling us exactly what to do. Sometimes it's having a series of doors open up, and you just have to choose the right door, and eventually you will choose the right door. You know, God doesn't really, talk too much about, specific instances of, what you do in your day to day. Like I said, like I've said in the past, your free will isn't demonstrated by whether or not you go to Taco Bell or McDonald's. And I think that that's important for people to people for people to kind of like pay attention to. Where's your free will? Is it with what Christ wants, or is it with something that you want? And I think most people would say that they want what Christ wants. But when it comes down to it, it's clear that it's only what they want and what makes them, uh, shall we say, orthodox. Yeah, that's about all I have for it. Anthony, what's your opinion on things?
I was just going to say that, like, I understand somewhat your skepticism on relics and things. So, like, I was actually going to bring up the Shroud of Turin, but which might not be what you expected. Like, to agree with you to at least a point, right?
Right.
Obviously, I don't agree entirely because I think that there is such a thing as valid relic, whatever. But like,
Well,
I am
I'm not
sometimes
saying that there's no relics. I'm just saying that the standard for truth is incredibly high, and some sleight of hand isn't enough to do that. Like the Shroud of Turin
yeah.
is a relic. It has very
But
specific things
Shroud of Turin's
associated
like
with
an
it.
interesting one to me because you could get they just did a whole show on Aquinas on this, and by the end of the show, like in looking at the comments, it made me kind of uncomfortable, and this is why. Like there, first off, I love Pints with Aquinas. I think Matt Fradd's an excellent interviewer, and it still was a great interview. So I recommend the show. It was with a guy, Father Andrew Dalton. You could get a PhD in shroud studies.
Hmm.
Like that is a thing that you could get. And he was going over all of these amazing things about the shroud. And people in the comments were saying like how moved they were by like what was discovered and whatever. And all the time just had this nagging question like in the back of my head going like, but we've never dated it.
Yep.
And we haven't. Like they did try and date it. They tried in the 80s and they did a phenomenally stupid job. Like that's the whole thing. So don't get me wrong, it has absolutely not been disproven. I'm not saying that it is. Like this is inarguable. It simply has not been disproven. Right? Like
Yes.
there is no reason. And the evidence points very much in its favor. But it is a fact that we can date it. We have the technology nowadays.
Yep.
And due to the debacle in the 80s, like people are afraid to, we haven't done it. So, Father Dalton, at one point in the interview, this is the guy he's talking to, right, says something along the lines of, like, if the shroud turned out to be fake, I would rest easy. Now, I think the sentiment there is correct, and that should be your
Yes.
sentiment, right? But, like, Matt Fradd, I think, said something, and I'm glad he said this, because this was my immediate thought. He immediately said, no, you wouldn't. That's a lie. Like, kind of
Right.
jokingly, but and then he goes, "Okay, well, yeah, I'd be disappointed." And that was like my thing the entire time was like, I can't imagine spending a PhD on this because I genuinely see the Shroud of Turin is the sort of object where if it was not a genuine miracle shroud, I can't see any value in it. Like
Hmm.
it offers me nothing unless it is real. So I'm like, am I really going to get a PhD in something that I don't think it would be falsified? I think the evidence is very strongly in its favor. Like, don't get me wrong. I think that there is very good reason to believe that the Shroud of Turin is legitimate. And if
Hmm.
I were a betting man, I would bet that it was. But I'm like, am I really going to dedicate my life to something that, like get a PhD, spend thousands or even tens of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands? It's a PhD. That's a lot of schooling, right? Of
Yep.
dollars on an item that you could disprove with carbon dating. And then then I can't think of any other, like as depressing as it sounds, I really cannot think of how it wouldn't have just been a waste of my time. Like I've just been looking at a random
Yep.
shroud with somebody's bloodstains on it. Like it's cool, but it's just a historical curiosity. So I think putting your faith in relics for that reason, I think, is a little bit dangerous. Uh, like I would not convert people, with the miracle of the sun or Lady of Fatima. Like
Yep.
I would not point to Our Lady of Lourdes or Lady of Fatima or whatever. Like it's dangerous ground to go on because it's like, okay, but then it is disproven. And you go,
Yep.
well, the core tenets of the faith are not affected. Why we believe, like it's very explicit why we believe. Her faith is based on testimony, written testimony,
Yep.
and this is true. And or if you want, from Catholic, Orthodox, or whatever perspective, like oral testimony passed down, a body of believers, not because of relic,
Yep.
right? You should never be so dependent on a relic or a vision or a mystic or anything that it would affect your faith if you learned that it was all wrong,
Yep.
right? Like I love Joan of Arc. Love Joan of Arc. I am a huge admirer of Joan of Arc. Like I've read multiple biographies on her. Like she is legitimately one of my favorite figures in world history. But the fact of the matter is, if it were proven to me tomorrow that all of her visions were delusions, my faith would literally be unaffected.
Yep.
Like I would be, don't get me wrong, I would be disappointed because I think it would be like, oh, she's such a fascinating historical figure. I also don't think that would happen, right?
Right.
Like I see no reason to believe that that would happen. It literally isn't explained by anything besides, genuine. Like there's absolutely nothing that has even come close to explaining Joan of Arc.
Hmm.
But if it came out, I have no idea how you would even do this many years removed down the line, but it somehow came out that everything was explained by the fact that like maybe a diary comes out. Joan of Arc lied, right?
Right.
Like she lied, like it just comes out. We find a secret hidden diary, you know, or witnesses come out and go like, "Oh no, she lied." Like we found these entries. It's proven. We know it. It would not affect my faith at all,
Yep.
nor should it. Like it absolutely should not. Same thing. Like I think that Sam Harris, like Mother Teresa, I consider to be one of the great saints of the 20th century. I consider her to be like a hero. Like that she was a marvelous woman. She was slandered by Sam Harris, who's one of the new atheists. I believe it was Harris that slandered her. Either Harris or Hitchens, one of the new atheists. Uh, Absolutely like told lies, insulted her viciously. He literally used her in a debate with William Lane Craig to prove that you did not need to be moral to be a Christian, which I think is just like disgusting. Like I consider what he did to be absolutely disgusting. But with all of that said, like let's say he's right about Mother Teresa. Like if he was, I would be disappointed that Mother Teresa, but my faith is not in Mother Teresa. My faith is in Christ.
Yep.
You know, like
And Christ is pretty clear. He tells the Pharisees and Jews that were, asking him for a sign, that the only sign that they'll be given will be the sign of Jonah. Like he's already get that he would be dead, buried, and resurrected and such.
yep.
That after 3 days. But it I don't want to put it like that is sufficient for salvation. Um, the some things might have been very impressive in the past when people didn't know better, but for all the curses of the modern world, we do have access to a certain amount of, we know, everyone can know. There are whole libraries that are at our fingertips. You can look up now a complete edition of Thomas Aquinas's Summa Theological and read it back to back, through Project Gutenberg and other places. Like, there's no excuse anymore for bad theology. And maybe there'll be an excuse again in the future when things kind of fall apart. But in the past, you had a priest in a Celtic church, barely educated, or maybe he was well educated, one hopes, but maybe he had some weird ideas. Well, there's a 5 day ride to the nearest bishopric. Um, the nearest bishop who would certainly know better, provided that he wasn't given it through investiture, and is just the second son of a lord and is concerned about making his own kingdom here. One hopes. That isn't the case, but it there wasn't a check and balance. I think that's part of the reason why Cathars like spread like wildfire. There wasn't anything to check and balance, and the idea spread. It's why Savonarola lasted as long as he did, or John Calvin. Like it's without the checks that exist and need it, you know, it there's no real word against heresy. And the big thing that I mentioned earlier, you know, it comes down to Jesus Christ. We are not Christian by culture. We are not Christian by blood. It's the reason why I haven't gone over the Slav thing. Like most Slavs would probably either say they are atheist or Orthodox. Maybe both, depending on how much vodka is in them. Uh, you know, whatever you think of that kind of thing, and jokes aside, Christ doesn't care. Christ is not going to care. Once you are a Christian, that stuff doesn't matter anymore. It's one of the things that matters in this world, in our lives, that culturally we can trace. But when it comes to Christ Himself, uh, he doesn't have that. So a lot of this stuff that comes down to it, you know, we're going to be shocked, and there's going to be a whole lot of Orthodox and Catholics and Christians and Protestants and evangelicals and stuff like that, and we're going to look at each other. It's like, huh, neat. No Mormons though. All right, take that, South Park. All right, so that's basically everything I wanted to say. I don't really think we have anything more for you. Uh, let's.
No, I will add this. I know for a fact that if there were like an educated, intelligent Orthodox here, they would and could push back on all of these points very intelligently.
Yes.
So, I am aware of this. This is not necessarily like an entirely fair, I guess, thing. Like we're fighting against an opponent that literally is not here. I do want to say though that like my goal with this was not to slander the Orthodox, by any means. I assume that's not your goal, though. You can do what you want. Ben's like, no, I just really want to slander the Orthodox. That was the only reason I did this.
That's why I woke up in the morning.
Yeah. No, but in all seriousness, like this, the goal was not to slander the Orthodox. If I misrepresented something of theirs, then I genuinely apologize, because like that was not the goal. Like a lot of these general comments, for example, where I said that like I think that historically the papal claims are validated throughout history. You better believe that the Orthodox are going to push back on that. Like
Yep.
they will push back hard on that. And I even know what they'll point to. They'll say, "Oh, formula of Hermisdus, like there were parts of it that were left out."
I don't even know what that is. Literally the first time I've heard of it.
This is you're in the deep lore now.
No, but you didn't have to cut me off. Like it's one of those 4chan Hyperborea memes, except it's like Catholic deep lore.
The Catholic Orthodox deep lore formula of Hermisdus. Or Pope Vigilius and the 3 chapters controversy. There's one for you. Once again, we're going to the deep cuts now. The excommunication of Pope Honorius. That's a common one, right? Like
Yep.
that one you might even have heard of.
Oh, I have.
Yeah, that
I'm shocked that a pope
100
named himself out of Honorius.
Like these are all things the Orthodox absolutely would push back on, and they would be like, like 100% papal infallibility, like the whole thing was disproven here, and like I know what you're referring to, but like the Catholic position on councils is different. Like Jay Dyer has this whole bizarre obsession. I'm sorry, I'm speaking meanly about Dyer. I think Dyer is just a nasty person. Like he's just an extremely unpleasant guy. He has very bully jock energy, jock bully energy. He makes fun of people. Like literally, this is a real thing, and this is why I'm mean to Dyer. literally, I saw a clip of him in a debate with someone, and he made the guy so angry. The guy was like sputtering, and he made him angry because he insulted him. Like, he didn't make him angry because he had pwned him so hard. He made him angry because he said, like, you're a spurgy moron or something like that, right? And
I
the
never
guy got
watched it.
so angry he started sputtering, and Jay Dyer started mocking him. And I'm like, why do people agree to debates with him? There was one guy who called himself like the Byzantine Scotist. It was a debate over like, I don't remember exactly. He called him he called him like a spurg, and the Byzantine Scotist like literally paused and said, "Okay, fine, I'm a spurg, but why am I wrong?" And he just proceeded to continue insulting him. Like he just kept insulting him. I do not like Jay Dyer.
Yeah.
There was the most fun thing. I've mentioned Eric Ibarra a few times. He wrote a great book on the papacy. It's a historical book. I highly recommend it. Ibarra's very, very good at the historical end of things. If anything, I actually think he puts a little bit too much emphasis on it because he believes you need like 10 years of study to pull out all the thorns, and cut through everything, which I think is excessive. But I cannot deny the man's chops, his scholarly chops. And he got into a debate with Dyer on the papacy, and it is considered, like I saw in the comments and other people, that's considered by many people to be the only debate that Dyer has ever outright lost. The reason being that Ibarra didn't let him like dictate the pace of the conversation. You know, like he would try and change the subject to like epistemology, and Ibarra would be like, "We're getting there. Let me make my point first. We're getting there. Let me make my point first." Finally, it ends with Ibarra like Dyer calls Ibarra an idiot multiple times, and Ibarra goes, "Okay, if he's gonna insult me, then I'm not doing this. Like, what are we doing here?" It was a extremely cathartic debate, seeing how easily he bullies other people, and he just could not get through Ibarra. Uh, but yeah, Dyer. With that said, Dyer is not representative of Orthodoxy. Let's be clear.
Mm.
I'm not claiming he is. There are absolutely like asshole Catholic apologists, asshole Protestant apologists.
All the
I
time.
wouldn't. Yeah, and I would not claim that Dyer is representative of Orthodoxy. He just happens to be probably the most famous YouTube Orthodox apologist.
Yeah.
Uh, like Seraphim Rose, you mentioned, was big. Callistos Ware, who died recently, was big. There's I can't remember. There was another one. He's a priest. He converted. I don't mind him as much, even though I don't agree with him about many, many things. But he's a lot more polite. But like, I put Dyer as like, he is extremely smart, but he's a bully. Like he uses his intellect to bully people. Yeah, like he uses the fact that he is a quick speaker to bully people into his position, and I just have a really big problem with that. Uh, I don't respect it. I don't appreciate it.
Yeah.
Now, with that said, it's true, as Bradford said earlier, like, I once emailed an Orthodox priest in real life and asked him politely, like, if I could sit in at the back of a divine liturgy because I was curious how it differed from the Byzantine Catholic version. Now, for whatever reason, I didn't end up making it over. I forget why. This was months ago, but something happened. But he responded very promptly and very politely when I made it clear to him that I was not interested in converting, and he very nicely said, "You're absolutely welcome. Sit in the back, like say hi, right?" Like, So, I in real life, that is really most of the extent of my interactions with the Orthodox. I don't talk with them that much, and but he was very polite, very welcoming, right? Like, and I'm sure he would have been if I had went. Like, I have no reason to believe otherwise, right? Like, I don't have anything bad to say about any individual Orthodox person who I know. I don't have anything bad to say about Orthodox I have met in real life. I have some issues with the Orthodox Church, but even in a very broad sense, there is absolutely no question that they are a branch off of the mere Christianity. Like Rollo Tomasi converted to Orthodoxy, and from his hedonistic atheistic lifestyle. And Rollo Tomasi, like, read his stuff. It's very clear that the man's a Christian. Yeah, like it. You would I would consider it like an absurdity if you were to deny to me that like Rollo Tomasi was a Christian because he was an Orthodox, right? Like he is clearly a Christian.
I
Yeah. So
haven't been able to to figure it out. I haven't followed Rolo in years.
I've looked at some of his stuff since he's converted. And he's very clear, like follow Christ, like follow, you got to follow Christ. He looks a lot to like Eastern spirituality. Oh, I'm sorry, Bradford is right. My mistake. Bradford says that's Roosh, not Rollo. That
Oh,
explains why
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
wrong.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you're completely correct. That's what I meant to say. I confuse the pickup artists in my head sometimes with similar names. It's a problem.
Yeah.
Roosh, Roosh, not Rollo.
Roosh, oh
Uh,
man, like to
Same thing
listen
though.
to
Like,
his talk is he's excellent. If he's
yeah,
faking
like
it, he's certainly going the whole 9 yards.
it would be an absurdity to deny. Like to me, it would be literally like you're almost at the level of a reductio ad absurdum, like to
Yeah.
deny that Roosh was a Christian because he's Orthodox. Like if you listen to the man speak, he oozes love for Christ.
Yes.
Yeah, it's honestly that is probably one of the most massive white pills I've ever seen. Like
Oh yeah.
Roosh's conversion is legitimately one of the most remarkable conversion stories I have ever witnessed. The fact that like so many times you see with these conversions, people try and keep what they had and just, like they convert and they publicly are repentant, but they keep their money and they keep their books out there. And Roosh wasn't having any of it. Like he dropped his books from the store. He repented of what he said in those books, right? Like he got cut off from people he used to know. He got cut off from jobs. He got harassed by people.
Yep.
Like he he did it. Like I was so impressed by what happened with Rouge. Like that was real courage. Uh and that was like real love for Christ. Like to deny that Rouge was a Christian because he happened to choose an Orthodox church, that was a direction he went. That is an absurdity.
Yes.
And I am saying this too. Like, I'm saying this from a mere Christian perspective. From a Catholic perspective, I consider the Orthodox like an apostolic and a sacramental church. Like I consider them to have valid sacraments. I consider them to have to have a line, an episcopacy that has laying on of hands. So even like beyond the mere Christian angle, like I do think that unity is something that we should pray for and desire. Unfortunately, I don't see it coming any deeper than the Eastern Catholic churches, anytime soon. Which is sad to me. Like I think that that's a tragedy. Uh,
There's So I do need to bring this to a close.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
just because there's a lot to it. Like it's not a simple issue, but I think we've clearly explained here why we too are not orthodox. Ultimately, things like I didn't even touch on this because it's so absurd that it's not even an argument to me. The age of the church means absolutely nothing to me when it comes to sort of like whether you should join it or not. Um, there's a whole lot of other things here, and one of the things that kind of gets me on it is that while we've been talking, I checked on Social Galactic where I advertise these streams, and a gentleman has posted 30 plus replies on this. Um, there's a certain mania with some of the
Oh, I'm curious now.
new
I'm going
members
on there.
with members of the church. And the thing is that it doesn't do anything for me to sort of say, well, this 6th century, that. I don't care. I do not care. What did they say in the 6th century? Well, they said this. Okay, we could talk about that. I don't care how old anything is. I want to be clear. I want to be very clear to everyone on this platform. To use age, to use authority, to use, papal this, patriarch that, does not mean one single thing. The only thing I care about when it comes to my theology is what does the Bible say. I will fight on it on any issue. If Anthony wants to say, Ben, we're going to have to talk about, supplications to the saint because of that verse you quoted. Okay, we're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about it through Scripture.
Oh yeah,
Um,
I'm reading this guy. I'm I'm pretty unimpressed.
Yes. But
I'm just
this
gonna
is
say that.
for him, but for everyone else. But
Like, I'm not gonna say who did, but he's like essay on Contras and how Humanae Vitae weakens the stance on Contra. Like, come on, dude. Like that's to me that's like when you talk about what is spurging, that's spurging. Like
yes,
Humanae Vitae is incredibly strong against contraception. You go, no, in the first century they were even stronger. Like, okay, but you're missing my general point, which is that you in Orthodox are arguing that you need to be against contraception, but like the Greek Orthodox theology manuals are being published can't agree with you on this.
yep,
Like you're missing my point. And it's like now you're arguing that we're actually weaker on contraception. Like you realize nobody believes you.
yeah.
Uh,
There's like,
I'm not gonna name the guy because I don't feel like having
yeah, no,
people
we're not
pile
gonna
on
name him.
him. But I'm annoyed.
But it's
It's just like this is dumb.
it's like some of these things. It's like, well, look at the Russian Greek schism. So, and he says it's a breaking con celebration, not communion. But to me, it doesn't that doesn't do anything, right? Like it, I don't even know what con celebration is. It's literally the first time I've heard this term. Pardon the adverb.
And no,
Um,
yeah, I don't even know what he's talking about. So many of these things, he's like, the Rome has three theologies are considered valid. They are contradictory, are considered valid to hold. He is absolutely correct about this, and I agree with that. They contradict, but are valid to hold. That is because Rome has decided that where they contradict, they do not have the authority to decide which one of them is right, but there are essentials that we can agree upon. And he's like, this is where he's going. But if you have the correct Christology, then why would you say, well, this is my point. This is one of the reasons I'm not Orthodox, right? Like, I don't agree that I need to pick one, that I need to say, like, no, you're wrong, and then that's it. Now, I know that that sounds like a very Protestant opinion to hold, right? But my whole point here, don't worry, I am very aware of what I'm saying.
yes.
Uh, but I guess what I'm trying to say here and what my point is with that is that these are positions that I don't think that the Orthodox, that Rome will say, like, you are allowed to hold it, and the Orthodox will go, no, you're not. Not to mention, it's like, I've never seen, I'm going to be honest with you, I've heard arguments on, like, the energy essence distinction. That's called palimism. I don't know why he called it Scotism and Thomism, but not palimism, by the way. But as I'm reading through this, I don't know why he does not call it that. Uh, but, but with that said, uh, the palimism, like I'll be honest with you, I've never heard an argument for palimism that resolved problems better than Thomism.
Yeah.
Like I have never heard that before. Also, he is absolutely wrong that they have one creed, one theology, and one
Yeah.
Christology.
Yeah.
That is simply false.
It is
There's even
absolutely
a
false.
there's a Western Orthodox church. Like
So
there is a Western Orthodox church that
right.
has a Roman Mass but are in communion with the Greek Orthodox. Like these are the things like no, you're part of an Orthodox church that has one creed, one theology, and one Christology, but they have a different, they're part of that authority structure of like you listen to your bishop, you listen to whatever. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm annoyed, but not enough to keep going. I'll stop.
Sure. And I just want to point this out because he did put out an actual argument over um, the Mary thing. The Protestant brings up, I guess that's me, brings up a good point, though the Orthodox are more precise. Again, talking about my argument that,
I will not be arguing original Mariology right now.
yeah, we're not going to argue it. Yeah, that's right.
But you can make your comment.
Uh, no, I'm saying it what he says that the Orthodox position is, as I understand it. Christ inherited human nature from the Theotos ever Virgin Mary. Two, what nature Mary has, he has, which I reject in the way that it's meant. Uh, three, as human nature inherited from Adam is marred by original sin. If Mary doesn't have that marring, then her nature is different from the rest of mankind. Again, since I've already rejected point two, that the nature of Mary is the same as the nature of Christ. In sort of the sin context, all the ones post that, and then four, this means that Christ did not in hypostatize universal human nature, meaning universal human nature was not united with divinity in Christ's person. 5, given Orthodox soteriology of theosis, this means that all humanity except the Virgin are damned without hope.
I've heard this version of the argument before. I'm not going to respond to it now.
That's fair.
That is all I will say.
And quite frankly, I'm going to be very clear. I'm not going to invite you on, my dude, because you're clearly listening to us. You know, if there is such a thing as an Orthodox, with coherent arguments, who can succinctly define why they're different from Catholic arguments, without using words I have never heard of before. I've used hypostatic union before. I want to be clear, but in hypostatize, like, you can't use that to explain theology to a layperson. There's problems with delivery that cannot be overcome just by saying, well, it's what we believe and here's the basic definitions. I have never heard of even the Catholics saying what nature Mary has, he has. In other words, from what Catholics have spoken to me, Mary received the nature from Christ in a sort of timey-wimey paradox kind of way. Not Christ comes from Mary. This is how most Catholics have presented Mary to me.
So I have heard this argument that he's made.
Sure,
I'm not convinced.
It's fine, yeah. But like what I'm saying is that as a guy who has heard this from the first time, I'm saying that the arguments that I've heard in the past have this is reverse to what they are. In other words, this flows from Mary, not from Christ. So it's one of those things that show up, and it kind of just proves our points, especially when it comes to theology. Whatever the Orthodox believe from the outside, it's at odds as to the evidence that we have. It's at odds to other theologies that we've theological ideas that we have seen presented, whether or not we're not going to, but they're different. To the point where they're so out there that even somebody as well studied as myself, and I'm but a student of this stuff, can only piece together because he's heard of other things, that are considered in Protestant circles, especially a term like hypostatic union, to be like the nerd theologian pastor, is talking about hypostatic union day again, ha ha ha, which my pastor does. It's very funny, but it doesn't.
The laughs we have.
Welcome, Mary, hypostatic union day, ha ha. It doesn't. Like, the communication that you want to give to us about orthodoxy does fall flat, because if it can't be drowned out into simple terms that can be either argued or refuted, it hurts it.
Also, I want to make a correction here. He says that I made the claim, and it has to be me because I'm the only one who talked about this. The Chalcedon Schism had no real differences, and then he goes, that's definitely false. That is not what I said. What I actually said was that it has been understood in the years to come that the Coptic Church doesn't actually hold any significant differences in Christology. He mentions arch-heretic Severus of Antioch. Severus of Antioch quite possibly did, but the entire Coptic Church was anathematized. And the Coptic Church today, I have heard Coptic priests speak and say that they believe that there is one, that they don't believe in what he calls tritheism, that there must be three divine natures. They believe in three persons in one nature, Trinitarianism as understood by lowercase o Orthodox Christianity. So the fact is, whether arch-heretic Severus of Antioch, not to mention, and I will also say this, I am not convinced that just because he says this, that Severus of Antioch necessarily was using the word nature and person the same way that we do nowadays in 2023. or that the Western Church was using, or that Constantinople was using. Sometimes words were used in different senses at the time.
Yeah.
And I know for a fact that the Coptic Church today is not heretical Christologically or in their Trinitarian theology. I have talked to Coptics today. My claim was not that uh, there was nobody on the Chalcedon side who was a heretic. Obviously, that could have been the case. My claim is that nowadays it is understood generally by all sides that there's even a very good case for communion today between the Coptics and Constantinople. Now, he says later, there is one device, blah blah blah. Uniatism means Rome has multiple systems of conflicting theology. This is true because we have not defined one as necessary for belief. There are ultimate ways of expressing the same beliefs. Christology, I strongly disagree with this. I don't see any differences in Christology. Two creeds, so one we say and the Son, the other we don't. However, it needs to be understood that both sides understand that we mean the same, that we are expressing the same theology, united politically under the Vatican. Uh, politically, I suppose. The Chaldean Catholics who do the anaphora of Nestorius. So, I am not convinced that Nestorius was actually a heretic. I, my reading on it, I am very unconvinced that he was using terms the same way. Uh, he is absolutely wrong that the Orthodox Catholic Church has one creed, one theology, and one Christology. So, to be clear here, does he mean the Coptic Church? Because he just called them heretics. That's an Orthodox church. Like, I thought you just said that they weren't heretics. That's very not true. Uh, so, are you claiming that? How about the Western Rite Orthodox? Are they a valid Orthodox church? Oh, they're not. So, wait a minute. What do you mean they're not valid? Who says they're not valid? Is it your patriarch or is it the patriarch under them? Which patriarch should we be listening to? Like, how are we deciding this? I thought that was their whole point, right? Like, or maybe, or is their theology the same as Orthodox theology? They just have a completely different liturgy that coincidentally looks like Rome. Little weird. I don't really get how that makes sense. Oh, the break in concelebration, not communion. That's funny. If you talk to Jay Dyer, he makes a big deal out of the reason that he left his union with his patriarch is that he was a heretic. So Jay Dyer doesn't agree with you. You are making very strong claims on behalf of Orthodoxy that I don't think other Orthodox are going to be willing to sign on to. Uh, like, and that is my point. Oh, you have to go to the fathers for their beliefs on contraception. Humanae Vitae was weaker. Really? Because the Greek Orthodox Church of America's official theology manuals don't seem to agree with you. So, considering that there is a discrepancy between what you're saying, what these random dudes on YouTube are saying, what certain patriarchs are saying, how do you intend to resolve it? Are you going to put out an encyclical? Will there be a pan-Orthodox council? Uh, doesn't seem like it. Yeah, it doesn't seem like it. The church in Ukraine is in full communion with the Moscow Patriarchate. The Ukrainian church was just banned. Yes, I know. Uh, that whole thing is complicated. The wording is really specific. It's really annoying. However, I will accept that correction. Ukrainian church and the church in Ukraine are completely different things. It's like really weird. There's like the Church of Russia and the Russian church. So I'll accept a correction there.
Yeah. All
Uh,
right. So yeah, I'm just
I
gonna
just
stop.
want to respond to I want to respond to like things that were addressed at me where it's like, no, I'm sorry, I'm not going to cop to this point.
No.
And we're done.
Yep. There. Yeah. No. There's no point in us agreeing to things that we just don't believe. And even with the differences that there exists between a Catholic and a Protestant theology, um, going on and on about how things are in Eastern Europe, where everyone believes the toll booth thing. Yeah, you're right. I'm not going to go to Eastern Europe to prove you wrong. But for most of the people who are promoting the toll booth thing is in America. Like, there's nothing but illogical fantasies in your arguments that I assume have been spread around the Orthobro community. Whatever it is, my hopeful brother in Christ, stop posting so much on my account because I will block you. not because I can't find arguments. We've been counter arguing you for the last, I don't know, 15 minutes or so, 10 minutes, 12 minutes, somewhere in there. And your arguments are not impressive enough for us to continue on. So, again, I'm just going to say it right here. Here's the standard of behavior. Stop, or I'll block you. But I want to thank everyone who is here today. Bradford Walker, Warren C. Bennett, and others who are listening. And I really hope you appreciate this. I hope it makes it clear why Anthony and I are not Orthodox. Please join us next week. I'm not quite sure what we're going to do. I might have a guest, but I'll certainly have a guest the week after. Do join us again next week. Same time, same place, same universe, same synthwave beat.
I'm gonna watch The Chosen.